Hey guys, it's Samuel the Aviator here, and today we're talking about how I got a 96% on my private pilot written test. And I've never been really the kind of guy to, just go and be like, well, I passed, I got a 75, I got an 80. I really like to get really good test scores. I think it shows that you study hard, that you're a hard worker, and that you really care about what you're doing, whether that's flying or just anything in life. And I think it'll help to maybe impress the examiner a little bit or let him know, hey, you study. Although I know there are a couple people that say if you've got 100% or something like that, some examiners will be like, well, you just memorized everything. But once you're working on your oral with him and he kind of sees that you do have that knowledge, I think he should kind of maybe take it a little easier on you, or just realize that you didn't just memorize everything, that you actually care about what you're doing and how you want to do it. So I guess the first thing that I want to talk about is the materials that I used and that it seems to work really well. So I kind of did a hybrid of online. I used King's online ground school for private pilot. I also used a few books. I use a pilot's handbook of aeronautical knowledge, and that's more directly for the written test. I also use the airplane flying handbook, and that's not as much for the written test. It's more for, excuse me, it's more for learning how to fly and more maybe your check ride maneuvers and stuff like that. Although that stuff is applicable to your written test, especially since the ACS came out and they're trying to work more to integrate real world scenarios in their testing and their check rides. So that's what I used. I also used the FAR AIM. This is a 2019 version. This is when I took my test in 2019. I believe in October, but I may be wrong. So I took it last fall sometime, and I find it great. I mean, if you're a pilot, you got to have this anyway. Hard copy, you can actually go in and look up what you're looking at. So you can go to Part 91, and like here you've got your airspace, and that's also going to be in your ground school. But that's really helpful to use. So as far as the online portion, I just went through King's Ground School. They have a great ground school setup. You can do a lesson, then they have a quiz for you, and then you can watch the video or part of the video that you missed, or using their practice tests. So I did watch their videos, and then I also read my airplane flying handbook and my pilot's handbook of aeronautical knowledge. And I like to read, a chapter or two at a time per day or something like that of each book. And I like to highlight anything of interest. That really helps to, I think, retain the information. If you highlight, you're actually thinking about what you're reading. You don't just read it and forget about it. So I do that, and then I also use Test Prep Private Pilot. That is just for practice tests. You can do as many as you want, customize it, and you can also do a little bit on King's, I believe, but it's not as customizable. So I like to do that, and I did quite a few of those, and I'd study. I studied all of my material and went through the ground school. Then I started doing some practice tests, seeing how I was scoring and what I was struggling with. And then I'd take maybe a week and try and study what I was struggling, and then redo my practice tests. And it kind of seemed to me that I could go a couple weeks and I wouldn't really improve, or I would kind of hit a wall and I wasn't really improving at all. But it seemed like after I worked for a few weeks, and all of a sudden my scores would come up, 5 or 10%, out of the blue, which is only 60 questions, so it doesn't take much to do that. But that is something interesting. So it kind of seems like it's not really just a straight line up. It's more of kind of a step up, and then you kind of hit a wall for a while, and then another step up. So that was something that I wasn't really prepared for. But yeah, I kept working on it, and I mean, I think I kind of got that after a while. I didn't take my written till I could get high 90s on my practice test, and I want to say I got a few hundreds as well, although I couldn't guarantee that unless I look at my practice test history, but I do know I did very well. So something you're going to want to be aware is there's kind of a couple different questions or types of questions that you're going to have. You're going to have what I'd call your memorization questions, and then you're going to have more of your calculation questions or something like that. So the memorization questions could be like, let me look here. Which V speed represents maximum flap extended speed, which is VFE. So those are kind of your memorization questions. You're going to want to memorize all your V speeds, a lot of the regulations, all of the regulations that are applicable you want to memorize. Anything like that, those are your memorization questions that you're going to need to memorize to be able to really ace your test. You're going to have more of your calculation type questions, which are going to be your weight balance, performance, VORs, questions like that. Anything you're going to have to figure out. I like to have the actual hard copy of the knowledge testing supplement. This is basically the exact same thing they're going to give you when you go to get your test, take your test, and so it's really helpful to be able to actually study that, and you can get it online. I think it's easier just to buy the written version. I find it a little easier to study from a book, and I think I retain the information a little better if I do that. Something else you're going to want to do, you're going to want to know your airspace very well. This is a very difficult portion. You can get into trouble on your written test, and you can also get in trouble on your check ride, but it's very important that you know your airspace very well. So maybe just study your airspace very well, and then kind of customize a practice test to have just mostly airspace questions or all airspace questions. Go through, make sure you can do real well on your airspace questions. And another tough portion of it is the VORs. It is quite difficult to ace your VOR questions, and really some of them are very tricky. So I like to study VORs. Make sure you know your VORs very well, even in flight and your ground portion, how they work, everything like that. And then just do VORs on your practice test. Make sure you do real well on your questions, that you're not just memorizing them and answering, but you can actually figure out how the question is answered and why the answer is what it is. And then the third thing, which I think would probably give everyone but a weatherman trouble, is aviation weather. This was probably one of my most difficult areas of study, and I had to study a lot. I watched a lot of YouTube videos and online videos, and went through the weather section a couple times on King and my books, and then I did a lot of practice tests to make sure that my weather knowledge was where it needed to be. And some weather questions, a lot of them you're going to just want to memorize. There's not really a lot of ones that you want to figure out. So I like to do the practice test to get a kind of an idea of the big picture and a lot of the different weather type questions they were going to ask, so you could get them right. And I did not get a single weather question wrong on my written, so I was really thankful for that. It was probably one of the things I studied hardest for, and was the hardest thing to really get down well, but I'm glad that I really studied, or it would have given me a lot of trouble. And the other thing to think about is that the FAA does not release their test questions anymore, although they are extremely similar, if not word for word, on a lot of the practice test questions on King or on test prep, or probably on Sporties or anything like that. So it gives you a good idea. I wasn't sure, how close are these going to be, but they did very well in kind of the tricky wording and stuff that the FAA likes to use. So it is helpful, but make sure you're not just memorizing everything, especially the calculation questions, because you're going to probably see a lot of new questions how to figure them out is going to be the same, but you're not going to know the answer unless you're very good at figuring out and just figuring the questions in general and knowing how to get to the answer, not just knowing the answer because you memorized it after you got it wrong a few times. And so how to prepare for the test and to take the test. One thing you don't want to do is stay up all night studying for it and then arriving the next morning exhausted and not being able to think clearly. It's not going to be of any use to you to just try and cram everything you can. Just study hard, and even then maybe the last few days, kind of take it easy. Don't just study as hard. Take a few practice tests. Make sure your knowledge is there, and that after a few days it doesn't just all of a sudden go away. That you got a really solid knowledge base so that you can get your questions. When you get to the testing facility, they're going to want a few things, your paperwork, everything like that, and I'm sure you can easily look at online or whatever online course you're using. They're going to tell you what all you're going to want to need. But I recommend using an electronic E6B. It's very, very helpful instead of a manual E6B. You can get exact answers, and a lot of the time you don't have to use their charts that they have on the knowledge supplement. You can actually get your charts that you need, or your answers that you need, from your E6B, so you don't have to guess. I mean, it is basically a guess if you're trying to use their knowledge testing supplement. So do that, and you're going to have 60 questions. If you can't figure out a question, don't spend 20-30 minutes trying to figure it out. Maybe give it a guess and mark it, or don't answer it at all, just mark it. Take the rest of your test, mark the questions you're not sure about or that you just can't seem to think of the answer to. Then go back to those questions you marked. A lot of the time, after you go through your whole test and come back to them, you're going to find that you actually had a question that jogged your memory or basically answered it outright. And that's very helpful. And then maybe you have a question or two that you just can't think of the answer to. Maybe spend a little while figuring it out. You've got plenty of time left. This test is really not rushed. If you know basically all of the material beforehand, you don't really have to be worried about time. And once you're down to a question or two that you don't know the answer of and you've got a while left, maybe work on figuring it out. If you just can't figure it out, give it your best guess. I got 3 questions wrong. A couple of those were more of the trick questions, and the FAA doesn't really allow me to say what the questions were that I got wrong and what the answers were to them, although I do know that a lot of people do, and King actually asks for you to tell them the questions that they had that they did not have on their practice tests so that they can update them. So I don't know if this is something the FAA really enforces, or they really don't care, or if this was just my testing facility that had this rule. But I can tell you I got 3 questions wrong. They were kind of tricky. One was airspace, and another was about complex aircraft with a constant speed propeller, which I was kind of surprised about, since you cannot just fly a complex aircraft without getting your complex endorsement, which is some extra ground school. And it wasn't mentioned much in the ground school. So maybe that's something you want to brush up on, is your complex and high performance aircraft, and what you need to fly them and what some of their systems are. Just some basic knowledge. And that's about it. You're going to want to go to the testing facility with confidence, knowing that in all honesty you're going to pass, but the grade is really up to you just to get the best grade you can. So knowing you're going to pass is really something that helps to take the pressure off, except for some good pressure, that you want to get a really, really good grade, so make sure you focus on it. Don't overstress it. Don't stay up all night. Don't be kind of going in there hanging your head thinking there's no way I'm going to pass this. If you are thinking that, you probably didn't study hard enough, or you're just being down on yourself, which there's really no reason to do that. Go with confidence and know you're probably going to ace this. especially if you studied as hard as possible. And one other thing I did was when I was getting, maybe some 80s on my practice test, I scheduled my written for a few weeks later. So that gave me some extra pressure that I needed to really buckle down and study hard to get my practice test grades up, and also just study the areas I was weak on and to get those up, not just memorize the questions and get my scores up, which will do you no good once you get to the actual written test. So that's about it. That's all the tips and tricks I have. That is how I got a 96% on my written test, which, I mean, really, you're not going to do a whole lot better than that. You might, I'm sure there are people that get hundreds and 98s, whatever, which is very, very good. It's difficult to do. They're going to try and trick you, but do the best you can, and definitely be happy, I would say, if you get 90 or above. And yeah, knowing you studied your hardest and, you really did do well. That's about all I have. I'm Samuel the Aviator. If you liked this video, feel free to hit the like button. If you disliked it, hit the dislike button, let me know. And if there was a reason you did dislike it, let me know in the comments below, or another comment you had on how you aced your written test, or just what stage you're in studying. And feel free to subscribe to my channel. I'm a fairly new channel, and my channel is going to be all about aviation. I might do some flight vlogs and some more instructional videos or how-tos or just anything in aviation in general. So make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can stay updated to all of my new content that I have coming out, and make sure to keep the sunny side up. Thanks, guys.